よく一人でくずいずい。Hathaway's Flash is here, something that probably not even Tomino thought that would happen. But finally, amidst a pandemic, Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway was released, and to the surprise of all, it became one of the most successful Gundam movies ever. For all of us that do not live in Japan, we had to wait a little bit longer for it to be released on Netflix, something that I'm very grateful for, since I don't think that you have done a great job at the box office because, well, you know, pandemic and everything. But then again, Demon Slayer was a global phenomena, so it could have gone both ways. Now, it was a very long wait for a new chapter in the Universal Century Saga. A wait that was made harder by the lackluster previous movie Gundam narrative. In fact, I'll be honest and say that I even thought in reading the spoilers and the whole summary of Hathaway's Flash, since I never thought that it would be animated, especially considering that people who have read the novels say that it's a very dark story. You know, Tomino being Tomino. Good thing is that I restrained myself, and after narrative, Sunrise announced the Hathaway Saga, a movie trilogy that would adapt Tomino's Hathaway Flash, the original sequel to Char's Counterattack. And well, this is a very interesting movie. It feels very different to all of the Unicorn Saga, not only because of the absence of Zeon, since as always the Federation is super corrupt and nasty, Anaheim has very shady business practices, and all that good UC drama, but the thing is, the plot moves slower, and not in a bad way. It takes its time to establish the new characters, the new scenarios, and even the new conflicts. We're talking that we are now in UC 105. UC 0105. More than 10 years have passed since the legendary rebellion led by Char, and just short of a decade since the secret Laplace Conflict. Newtypes have been treated as a mere urban myth and all but denied from existence. The Earth is still polluted, and more people are finding it hard to survive the day-to-day grind of life. And here is where we meet our protagonist Hathaway Noah, Captain Bright's Noah child and war hero that survived the old wars and piloted a mobile suit even without proper training. But being Bright's son doesn't make him a Fedi supporter. In fact, Hathaway has a very deep connection to a new threat that the Federation is facing, the terrorist organization known as MAFTI. Having said that, my name is Absa, and let me guide you in this exploration of the atmosphere and story of Hathaway's Flash, not in a spoilery way, since this movie is just the first part, but more as an introduction to the second century of the UC, a new era where the psionic insurrections are a thing of the past, but the social inequality between human beings is still a very deep and systemic problem, and the gap between the poor and the rich is getting bigger and bigger. So, brothers and sisters, let's explore the story of Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway. Before I continue talking about the story, I want to give a little disclaimer and advice. I'll limit myself to only talk about the movie's story, not the whole novel. I actually got spoiled of what happens in Hathaway's Flash in the comments of my Char's Counterattack video, and well, it felt not so good. So, in order to stop it from happening to anyone else, I'll be very strict and delete any blatant spoilery comments of the novel. Don't take it personal, I'm just taking care of this great community. But, if you give us a heads up about the spoiler, then there won't be any problem, as I know that the novel is a story that came out more than 30 years ago, and many people already know what happens. Also, there are many rumors that say that Sunrise will change some parts of the story in order to fit what happened in Unicorn and to be more in line with F91. So, who knows exactly what will happen in the trilogy. And to be honest, I got spoiled by what happens, not how things happen in Hathaway's Flash, so I'm really looking forward to the adaptation of Sunrise, and it'll be great if they manage to include plot elements from Unicorn, narrative, and even F91. All in all, please be kind and do not spoil unless you warn us first. With that out of the way, Hathaway's Flash, and this is very confusing as the novel's name is Hathaway's Flash, the movie is only called Hathaway, but the protagonist is also called Hathaway, so for simplicity's sake, and since I'm not going to talk about the novel, I'll refer to the movie as Hathaway's Flash, and Hathaway, the character, as Hathaway. As I was saying, Hathaway's Flash feels very different to the previous Gundam Unicorn. It takes its time to guide us into this new century for humankind living on Earth and space. Long gone is the threat of war against Zeon. In fact, Zeon nor any of its factions are mentioned in the movie, which probably means that in those 10 to 12 years, people all but forgot about the space independence movements, and even though the Earth Federation is as corrupt as ever, people probably got comfortably numb. The story starts with a luxury flight boarded by a lot of the important players of the Federation that are descending to Earth for the Adelaide Conference, also known as the 25th Earth Federation Government Cabinet Meeting. So yeah, big wigs, head honchos, heavy hitters, call them whatever you want, but it's undeniable that they are key Fedi players. Aboard the Hounzen is also Hathaway, the son of Bright Noah, the legendary soldier of the White Base, and more recently the captain of the Ra Kylum, who has been in contact with almost every Gundam pilot and won 3 space wars. And you bet that Hathaway is well aware of that and not so fond of it. Before I move on to the story itself, as usual, I would like to give a little bit of context. The saga of Hathaway's Flash was written by Yoshiyuki Tomino, and it's a series of 3 novels published from February 1989 to April 1990. The original story for Char's counterattack was delivered between the years 1987 and 1988 in the magazine Animash, or Animage, I don't know how it's pronounced. The movie made its theatrical debut in March of 1988 and was a modified adaptation of the novel. And almost exactly 3 years later, in 1991, Mobile Suit Gundam F91 was released as Tomino's attempt to launch a totally new Gundam saga, set 3 decades after Char's counterattack and bearing no connections to previous Gundam entries. Also, please bear with me, I know that I have said a lot of dates, but I think it will make more sense once you hear the entire idea. Gaia Gear first ran as a serial in the Japanese Newtype magazine from April 1987 to December 1991. What I'm trying to say here is that yeah, Char's counterattack was first, but more or less at the same time, Tomino was already thinking of the direct sequel with Hathaway's Flash and also another spiritual sequel with Gaia Gear. The ideas and settings of Hathaway's Flash and Gaia Gear, even though they are almost exactly 100 years apart, the former happening in UC 105 and the latter happening in UC 203, are very similar, as Tomino was probably in the same mindset. The Earth Federation is completely useless and corrupt, so a resistance group emerges from the underground. Mafti is the name of Hathaway's resistance, whereas Metatron is the name of the rebel organization in Gaia Gear. Hathaway is the leader of Mafti and has the ideals of Char, and Franchi Char is the would-be leader of Metatron once his memories of Char awaken. They even share some of the names for the antagonist, the Hunters or Manhunters, which are known as Maha or Manhunter Agency in Gaia Gear. Both Manhunter groups are members of a very corrupt Earth Federation. So, in essence, even though Gaia Gear is not an official or canonical Sunrise/Gundam story, I kinda think that Tomino wanted to finish his Universal Century Saga with a Char as noble redemption story, even though it happened way in the future. It's almost as if Char was granted a new life, a second opportunity to redeem himself, be a hero again, and have a happy ending. Then again, I don't know how both of the stories end, so I may be reading too much in between the lines and speaking way out of line. But the truth is that there are a couple of parallels between both stories and both tie in to the overarching Char saga. Mafdi is even called the ghost of Char, something that Full Frontal may or may not agree with. On the other hand, F91 is a story that was written after Hathaway's Flash and Gaia Gear, and it is on purpose completely separated from any previous character and or Gundam storyline. So yeah, this is my extremely complicated and long way of saying that you can definitely expect a Gaia Gear spin-off video and an F91 video, as they are both important for Tomino's Universal Century Saga and Dramatis Personae. But yeah, for now, let's return to Hathaway's Flash. The setting of Hathaway's Flash, and even the character Hathaway, mirror and merge a lot of the settings and tropes introduced in Mobile Suit Gundam and Zeta. Amuro and Camille were the sons of important members of the Federation, albeit from science departments instead of directly from the military like Bright. And like Camille, Hathaway chose to stay more or less away from the Federation and joined a rebel organization. In Hathaway's case, he not only joins the rebels but actually leads the organization, much like Char and his second Neo Zeon. By UC 105, Mafdi's uprising had already begun, and even though they were terrorists, they had the support of the people, much like the AUG had at the beginning of Zeta. There's also a more or less love triangle between Gigi, Kenneth and Hathaway in the vein of Lala, Amuro and Char. With that said, we can definitely see that Tomino is reusing familiar elements and again weaving a story where the protagonists are against the Federation, a mirror reflection of Zeta, where after Char's counterattack, the narrative pendulum has swung back to the heroes being in the rebel side opposing the status quo. And even though it may seem as a way to recycle plot devices, I find it very interesting and poetic that Hathaway, a boy who was definitely influenced by Char and Amuro in the second Neo Zeon War, decided to step aside from his father's legacy to forge a new one with his own hands and merit. And the forging of a new legacy is something important that the film takes very seriously. This is a new Gundam entry, a new saga that has more or less completely left behind all of the psionic insurrections and drama. The only familiar thing that remains is the Earth Federation, but that has existed since day one of the UC calendar, and it's not going away anytime soon. As I said previously, Hathaway's Flash takes its time to introduce everything. We get to know Hathaway and his motives, Gigi and her mysteriousness, and even Colonel Kenneth's good intentions with the Federation, and of course Anaheim Electronics' very backstabby ways of delivering Gundams and doing business with anyone who is willing to pay, even if they are the two sides of the same conflict. When the movie was first released, one thing I saw was that a lot of people were unimpressed by it and others weren't able to follow the plot. The thing with Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway is that it's not a standalone film per se. It's really the next entry of the Universal Century Saga that has existed since the 70s, so it helps a lot if you're more or less familiar with the story. As a matter of fact, I can't really recommend starting your Gundam journey here. On the other hand, if you were expecting something like Unicorn that begins with a lot of heavy action and mobile suit fights, then you will definitely be unimpressed by Hathaway. Not because it's boring, but because we have to remember that it's the first part of the trilogy and it has to establish the new status quo of the modern era. Also, Hathaway's way of thinking and motives are heavily influenced by what happened in Char's counterattack. We can even say that he was scarred for life in that conflict, so a lot of his personality traits originated in that other movie. That's why you might feel that his growth or development is weird if you only see him in Hathaway's Flash. Long story short, Hathaway's Flash is heavily informed by the events of Char's counterattack, but it really does a good job in presenting us the current pressing matters of this new era. Speaking of the new era, the visuals of the film are amazing. You can definitely feel that the creative team paid a lot of attention to little details like light and shadows. With its camera angles, movements, and color grading, it almost feels like a live-action movie, just that it's actually a film composed of a mix of 2D and 3D. The expressions of all the characters are very well defined, which is definitely a sign of excellent character design. The mechanical design can be, for the most part, traced back to previous mobile suits that have appeared on other media, except for the Penelope and the Xi Gundam, which are almost an eyesore as they completely tower over the other mobile suits. But don't get me wrong, even though they look super weird, I absolutely love the mecha designs, especially the Dorito Gundam, the Xi Gundam. It's a mecha design so weird, so aberrant, so out there that I can't not like it. But to be totally honest, I prefer the Katoki version. I don't know if it's the more balanced and Gundam-y color scheme or what, but even though the white movie version looks cool, the Katoki design looks more classic. My interpretation is that they chose a mostly white Xi Gundam as a way to symbolically link the Xi to a pale horse, you know, the representation of death seen in literature or the Bible. The Xi Gundam is the pale horse being ridden by Mafti to bring death to the Federation. But then again, I may be reading too much in between the lines. Another interesting bit of information is that the letter Xi comes after Nu in the Greek alphabet. And if we ignore Unicorn and stay true to Tomino's chronology, after the Nu Gundam came the Xi Gundam. As for the story in itself, I hate to say it, but it's really nothing more than the introduction to the overall plot of the trilogy. A lot of things are visually communicated and the atmospheres are very intentionally made to make us feel either claustrophobic, lonely, dark, exciting, etc. Talking about the story beats themselves, regrettably not many things happen. We meet Hathaway, then Gigi, who may or may not be a Newtype, then Kenneth, who may in fact be one of the few good Federation officers. We also meet some of Mafti's crews, some of Kenneth's crew called the Circe Unit or Kirke, I don't know exactly how the pronunciation will be. The Penelope Gundam appears, the Messer fights it but gets captured, the Xi Gundam is delivered, the Gundams fight and the Xi emerges victorious. Well, not exactly like that. I mean, Hathaway still has PTSD, nightmares of quests, now driven by the crazy girl intern Gigi Andalusia, an inferiority complex now driven by Kenneth instead of Char, and a very ambitious goal for Mafti. But I'll talk about Mafti's purpose in a bit. First, I would like to address the maybe love triangle between Amuro, Char, and Lala. I'm sorry. Hathaway, Kenneth, and Gigi. If I didn't know anything about Gundam, I would really complain about the pseudo-love triangle. It comes from almost thin air and Hathaway does deviate a lot, and I mean a lot, from his original plans just because of Gigi. And Kenneth is just a fairy douche wanting to get into the blonde girl's pants. Or is he? I mean, we're talking about the Gundam. And I know that Macross, or Macross, however you want to pronounce it, is the king of love triangles. But Gundam doesn't shy away from showing protagonist and antagonist developing feelings for each other. We have the Amuro-Lala-Char triangle, the Camille-4 relation, the Quattro-Haman connection, the Glemmy-Ru non-relationship, the Yura-Haman anti-relation, the Casval-Quest-Hathaway-Gyune bizarre relation, and even Vanaji and Mineva have a somewhat relation. What I'm saying is that Gundam is no stranger to weird relationships, and considering the fact that Hathaway is a Newtype and probably Gigi also, then it was expected that these two humans bonded in such a way. As for Kenneth, and without spoiling myself by reading more about his character, I really don't know how he will fit since he hasn't displayed any Newtype sensibilities. I hope that they develop a little bit more of this triangle in a way that makes us care more for Gigi and Kenneth, and also shows that Hathaway has grown a little bit more since his crazy days with quests. Back to Mafti's goal. There's a great scene more or less halfway through the movie where Hathaway boards a taxi. There, the taxi driver tells the boy that he believes that Mafti should fight the hunters too, since they're deporting citizens and making it harder for people to live on Earth. The taxi driver goes on to say that the problem with Mafti is that they are too stubborn for trying to get everyone up into space, when the bow isn't as polluted and there's still enough food for them to eat. Hathaway explains that Mafti wants to make a change that will last 1,000 years into the future. And here's the interesting part. The driver starts to laugh and tells Hathaway that those who have work to do not have the luxury of thinking so far ahead, that he functions on a day-to-day basis. I really like that part, since it goes to show us that Hathaway, coming from a more or less privileged background, has the luxury to come up with ambitious plans that will have everlasting consequences, just like Char. But in reality, the normal, run-of-the-mill people don't have the time or resources to think that much in the future. The disconnection between the ideals of the rightful king of prophets and the reality of its people is very deep, something that may also be happening in our world. Not only is Mafti doing something illegal, but more importantly, that which they're trying to achieve may not come to pass, as people have other things to worry about that are definitely more important than them moving to space. All in all, the movie is great, definitely superior to Gundam narrative and a good palate cleanser and change of pace to all that the Unicorn Saga previously delivered. It definitely feels different to Unicorn. It's more moody and slow and atmospheric, but instead of feeling boring, for me, it goes to show that Hathaway's story is a bold declaration that things will be intentionally different from previous entries, that Sunrise is defying expectations of what Gundam is supposed to be. Even though there were few mecha fights and most of them were at night with low lighting, I really liked the movie, and hopefully we won't have to wait that long for the second entry of the Hathaway saga. And don't worry, until then I'll continue the Universal Century explorations with F91, Gundam Victory, and maybe in between Gaia Gear.
目覚めよ空ガンダム新時代第一章
Gundam Formula 91.
Thank you very much for staying till the end, and as you may have seen, this video was not as long as others because you know that I don't like to do movie summaries, so I tried to give a little bit more context to Hathaway's Flash plot, and also the adaptation is not complete. We're only 1/3 in, so there are a lot of things that have not yet been explored or presented. We still don't know if they will mention anything regarding Unicorn or even Psychoframe technology. There's also another rumor that Unicorn 2 is being developed, and it will be in that story where we'll get to know what exactly happened with Zeon and Psychoframe tech, as it's supposed to happen before UC100. But that's only a rumor, and if you ask me, I'd prefer if they explore those concepts as flashbacks or something else in Hathaway's Flash. I liked Unicorn, but there's been enough Zeon Remnant stories for it to be interesting or even relevant now. Anyway, I hope you liked my way of explaining and analyzing Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, and I know that I missed tons of interesting points, so please tell me in the comments what are your thoughts of this adaptation. And remember, please alert us if you're going to go full spoilers on the novel's plot. And as you may or may not know, my name is Absa, and we can continue the conversation over at Twitter, where you can follow me at Absolonicas, and on Instagram, where I post pictures of my figures, my cats, and sometimes even myself. I'll be trying to talk more about anime, comics, and maybe even figures. Until next time, always remember that in fiction lies power, so let's use it to forge a new type of story, our hero's journey.